to disasters. We also have some other issues as water quality, quantity, illegal mining that is using also the water resources. So in my interviews that I did to several sectors in the country, I also noticed that one of the central issues that they were concerned to the sectors was mostly irrigation, water pollution, and water quality, without not resting the importance that also have the water use of the clean water for people, especially in rural areas, or the water security that is related with transboundary waters, because we have two very sensitive border frontiers, the ones with Colombia and the ones with Peru. But what else we have? Ecuador have, for the first time in the world in 2008, a new constitution which provides the right of the nature. What it means? It was a new paradigm shift to a completely new vision of how to preserve, protect the rights of the nature against us, not just the disasters induced by climate change, but disaster induced by humans. So in that sense, these constitutions recognize the rights of the Mother Earth and also gives a special rights to indigenous people that they have in the ancestral rights to preserve and to protect the nature. So this was the first time in the world that a constitution legally involve the rights of the nature. So now in this moment, there are several countries in the world that also they are including in the national legal framework these rights in different way. Until 2020, I count 7 countries that formally include these legal rights. But if we go to the scanning in the world, there are more cases and more countries that are involved the use of the rights of the nature. In the Ecuadorian constitution, the rights of the nature, it was not just a paragraph or just a sentence line. It was more related, not just the right of the nature, but also the protection of the biodiversity, and also in some chapters, the good living regime, or what we knew as the well-being, or the good health. The idea was that this in the constitution, once that this was totally illegal implemented, it can be also in the law. But it was not so easy to comply with all these laws and demands, or to by what the constitution said about the environmental aspects and the conservation. And how come that? Well, the philosophy from these Ecuadorian constitutions through these articles, it was mostly right-based system that recognized the nature. In Ecuador, indigenous word is called Pachamama, the Mother Earth, because it was differed from the traditional system that see nature as a property. And there was one of the main issues, the property rights versus common property rights. So the system also introduced that the damage of the environment, it have some responsibility also from who is performing the damage. So it gives also the people the authority for the first time to, in behalf of the ecosystem, to claim that interest for this damage. And it could be by individual or can be by corporations. So it made the Constitution in 2008 more democratic, more inclusive, and also reflects the indigenous idea of nature. It is one of the main words in our Constitution is giving or recognizing the plurinationality of Ecuador. Even is this Constitution, there are a lot of attention of indigenous rights. They enforce also the rights of other minorities, community, as the Afro-Ecuadorians. So that is more or less why this combination is just introduce human rights, the nature, or the rights of the nature, it allows a more effective protection and response in case of a disaster. But also there is a kind of tricky word, how to give an object or the nature a legal personhood. And I think there is a lot of studies in these directions. I don't have a legal background, so my investigation goes to try to understand more by the social aspect of the impact that it have these constitutions in the communities. It brings a lot of doubts in other places, and how can give nature legal rights, what does it mean, how is going to change, especially with something has been for hundreds of years in indigenous community, and now because there is just in the Constitution, it was seen like more like a Western vision in something that already exists. So we could see cases as New Zealand, the Maori, they provide, they give to people that they are going to be the guards of the nature in case that they want to make some claims, or cases in Bangladesh, in Canada, and also in Colombia, in Chile, in another place. So one of the main questions was, what is the difference between individual and collective human rights? How it will be implemented? Well, the term legal personhood, you can see in different ways, as by the anthropologist, is a term that used to apply to human rights, and is also recognized as a group or as a unit. So, as I said, it is very complex, because in order to implement what the constitutions, at least the Constitution of the right of the nature, we have to have a clear understanding of the legal implications that what does it mean. But in my opinion, in my analysis, the rights of the nature that they are giving importance to the ecosystem and given to entitled to legal personhood status also have a very close relation with, in the same constitution, they bring from the first time what is the well-being, and especially this kind of cosmovision of the indigenous people, and what it means, the prosperity, the happiness, and the health of the environment where they live. So for me, there is a very close relation in these two terms or concepts. There are also good news about this constitution, or this new constitution. It was the first case that happens when they make a claim to individuals, or in this case, to a couple, that claims about the widening of a road by a river in a south province in Ecuador. They call it Loja. It was the first time they using what the Constitution 2008 from the President Rafael Correa, it brings to a claim to the court to recognize the Vilcabamba River's right. And in this case, it was violated by the road construction, and especially because the large amount of sediments that came to the river. And the case was positive. The court ruled in favor of the river, and make it the first Pachamamas, the mother earth rights, they were legally upheld. What is the problem? The problem is that even if the court was in favor of the river rights, it was very hard to implement it and to oblige and to make responsible the construction company on this case. So this has to also, we have to put attention about another kind of legal rights that it can be in direction of the private rights or public rights, because even if the road was made by a private construction company, the contract was by some of the instance of the government, by the Ministry of Transport. So the Ecuadorian Constitution even brings good news to the world. It was a very progressive constitution, followed for so many other countries nowadays. It has also some limitations, because when we regarding to water law, the law does not specify how this right can be implemented. And that is why nowadays there are a lot of, I count almost 60 claims that they are now in the court. And most of them, they are claiming between mining problems and damage in the protected areas, and also some, a few ones that they have to be related specifically with the river rights. In here, I want to introduce another term, and this is the property rights. By the property rights theory, we also have different connotations in the meaning, because it can be that how providing stakeholders with ownership of any factor of production of goods, because it's no land, but this can be the property rights, private property rights, with the land belongs to somebody, but in the land, they have natural common goods as a river. So much of this theory is going to provide distinction between what is private property right or what is the difference with the public property rights also. In here, I want to introduce one of my favorite theory that belongs to Eleanor Armstrong, but she also with her husband, they introduced several of the most well-known concepts about the common property, or what they knew the common property regime. She was the first woman to get the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. And some of us academics, we have been reading, of course, some of her work on this subject. Even though nowadays it is recognized the property rights arrangement that groups or communities are dealing with the management of their own resource, we know that also there are a lot of restrictions, and they are already facing some limitations on how to perform properly this management of the common resources. The common as a concept by Armstrong also has different connotations. It is related with resource environment or domain that is characterized by an open access of problem. I didn't want to introduce, but they make 8 principles of managing of the commons a little more easy to understand. And there are also include the benefit based most on the regulations that they are addressed to the local level. It gave some interesting examples of grazing, forest, fishery, and using a specific or especially experience from farmers, communities, and other stakeholders involved in this management decision. But coming back to Ecuador, my place of interest, and doing a research in the north area of Ecuador, the Mira River Basin, a very large basin that involves two large provinces, almost 500,000 people. And I am concentrating in the middle of this basin to my research through 4 case studies. There are a lot of constraints in the Ecuador, especially for the issue of mining, especially illegal mining, the well-known problem of deforestation that have very straight implications in indigenous support and vulnerable communities, minority groups. And we also have some major problems about the expansion of the agriculture frontier, and sometimes or mostly lack of support to simplify this claiming of the communities to the authority or to the national levels. But also, there is something that we are dealing with, the disaster risk management in Ecuador, and is the unclear use and interpretation of water governance, because water management is used in the context of the efficiency and to make more efficient the use of the resources. But water governance, that is a more social context, is not well understood and implemented. So there is a kind of lack of implementation or enforcement due to the laws and policy that they are not well implemented, or a lack of management just because there are conflicts of interest or because there are not enough resources for capacity building, especially in the communities. Until now, I has been presented very generally some of the elements that I have been reviewing in order to continue with my investigation. But I would like to focus a little more in the water governance challenge that I have been suffering in the process of my work, because it's very complex, especially in this area, where there are not just the issues of migration, because we have flow from the Venezuelans and Colombians to Ecuador, but we are also, this region is suffering from the incursion of military force from the ex-FARC guerrillas groups that there have some interest, especially with the related with the cocaine. So in this case, there is an enormous effect and impact in the environment. And the Mira River, the main river that is in my investigation, it has more than 300 kilometers. And it also goes from Ecuador, and 6% or a little more goes through Colombia in the last stage, in the lower part of the river. So I am here introducing a little more what river rights means. River rights, it can be just seen as a collaboration and partnership, but also we introduce here the idea of how collective property rights, it can be linked with the river rights, and which these rights are part of their territory, or they are part of the private property, and how they will be implemented on management at the government level, or the water governance. So the river problem, as I already mentioned, with the Vilcabamba River in the south of Ecuador, even if they claim about some problems in the river contaminated by the sediment of the widening of the road, they are also suffering from another kind of limitations, because there are not a specific legal framework to ensure that they are going to implement, even if they have a winning case by the court. So going to my case study, one of the 4 case study, I would like to present the Chota River. The Chota River is part of the Mira River Basin, and this is where it's located, like the division between the 2 main provinces, the north provinces of the Carchi, that is also a border with Colombia, and the province of Imbabura, that is one of the main provinces with a lot of environmental resources. So to understand here, in this case, I want people to interview to know the problematic situation that they have, especially related with water scarcity, because this community is one of the 3 unique communities, Esmeraldas, that is also in the north of Ecuador, in the Chota, in the Imbabura province, that they also are suffering not just from water scarcity or water problems, but because they are placed in one of the most dry areas in the country. This dusty valley between these 2 ranges of the Andes, they are have some difficulties because they are not just suffering for low precipitation and high temperatures, but also because the Chota River is having very strong environmental impact in their quality, because there are from the upstream, there are several places with illegal mining, and the quantity of heavy metal is very high. So there are some studies that the level of mercury is over the regular standards. And here, perhaps I will remind you, in the Constitution, the word of plurinationality. It means this Constitution in 2008 already include the rights, not just the nature, the well-being, but also the existence that they are already there, but for another community groups. So this is all information. We hope the next survey or sense in the world, it will be soon, but this is the last composition of the ethnic groups that exist in this moment in the area where I'm doing my research, focusing in Carchi and Imbabura, where, as you can see, the Afro-Ecuadorian indigenous, they are also co-living with other groups called mestizo whites, or the mix, as Montubios. The Afro-Ecuadorian Chota, it have a very, they give a lot of importance to the cultural rights. And this here is a kind of new approach I want to introduce in my study, beside the common property rights that I already mentioned, beside to introduce the idea that the Constitution already provides rights to the nature, but I want to introduce the value of the river have for the community. And in this way, to improve the water governance capacity that they have when they are facing very extreme climate events or anthropogenic threat scenarios. The key concepts that I am introducing in this case study is the river value on hydrosocial territories, the collective participation in management, and the first cultural heritage approach with the common property. I have here some key points. I would like to leave this to the end, because in this point, I want to introduce, I have a pleasure to invite one of the PhD candidate, a young generation that is also main point of my study, that the traditional knowledge blend with the knowledge of the new generations. And from the Chota Valley, there are a new generation that is giving or bringing this ancestral knowledge to introduce in the future vision to the community. And in this part, I would like to start my presentation and to invite Diego Palacios Ocles, a young PhD candidate, that I would like to hear from him more experience and history in his narrative about the Chota. So let me stop here my presentation and to invite Diego to introduce himself and probably to share with us his view or probably just his narrative. Hi, Diego, you're mute.
Hello, Sandra. Thank you very much for the presentation. As Sandra just said, I'm Diego. I'm a PhD candidate at Flaxo, Ecuador. I do political science, but I'm mostly concerned about political sociology. So I am studying a lot about race and work in Chota Valley. Thank you, Sandra, for the presentation. This is very important to go like across the nature rights and cultural rights, which complement a very close relationship to study these affairs. I would like to start saying that when you and Dr. John Anton interviewed me, I received a very interesting question from you guys, and it was, why hasn't the river or the water created social mobilizations as before, and even now has the land tenure done that? People has mobilized in this about the land, but why not about the water? And I answered this, that still in Ecuador, water is not privatized like it is in Chile, for example. So maybe that's why, as people still has access to the water, we are not conscious, let's say, about the problem, about the droughts that is going on the river. The quantity of water is now less than it used to be before. So maybe, as this is still a free asset, people hasn't noticed the problem. That just to introduce. I would like actually to do a historical approach to my opinion on your presentation, and I would like to talk about the importance of the river for this community. So in the pre-Hispanic era, when Indian caciques used to work in Chota Valley, they didn't live in Chota Valley. They would live in the highlands of Pimampiro and Ambuquí, but they would work here in Chota Valley, which they used to call Valle de Coangue. They used to call it Coangue Valley, because this was described as a place with a lot of sicknesses. It was difficult to live here, but it was a very good place to crop here, to work in the agriculture here. So they would do that. And why they would do that? They had the land, and they had the river to do that. So they created a very sophisticated irrigation system with the river. So these Inca caciques became actually wealthy, having those assets, the land and the river, and the very sophisticated irrigation system they created. They used to grow coca plants in here, corn, and coca and corn and olive. when the Spaniards arrived here, they wanted to come to these lands. They would be in El Reino de Quito, and in 1606 they created La Villa de Ibarra city, but they wanted to conquer these lands because the indigenous people who worked here, they were creating richness. They were created wealth in here, so they wanted to conquer these lands. And they had three reasons to do this. They had a vast amount of land, they had the river, and they have the irrigation system. And another important point they had here in order to come and create a richness for the crown was people to work freely for them. In that case, Indian slaves. So when Spaniards got here, at the very beginning, they were kind of sharing the land with the Indian people, but then they would, through very bad methods, achieve the whole haciendas that existed in Chota Valley, and they had it all. When the Indians were going away from here, they were going to the forest. Spaniards got African enslaved people to work in their haciendas. So they had, as I said, the land, they had the water and the irrigation system, and they had the people to work in here. So it was very important because they had the river. And what happens next? So I can go concluding my presentation. What happens next when the liberation comes, when the slavery is abolished? Black people, and even before, Black people escaping and forming palenques, free territories from Spaniards, they would choose places that were very close to the river, because this would allow the reproduction of these free groups. This would allow the access to food, the access to land and agriculture. So that's why some communities that are considered to be free palenques, for example, Chota and Juncal, these communities are very close to the river, even though sometimes the river causes damages to the land. People will remain close to the river because the river articulates their mode of life, their way of living in Chota Valley. So nowadays, people doesn't go a lot to the river as they used to before, because before we didn't have sinks in the house, for example. So we used to go to the river to wash clothes, to wash dishes, to get the water for the cooking. We used to do like a lot of things in the river. We would go there swimming. People doesn't go a lot nowadays, but the river continues to be very important for this population because Chota Valley is still an agricultural area. So the river continues to be the main resource to maintain the way of living in Chota Valley. So what will happen in the case of not counting on this asset anymore? People will continue to migrate to other places. This has happened a lot. Most of the people that remains in Chota Valley is because we still have the river as an asset to our way of living, to our mode of life in Chota Valley. So I really, really consider this to be a very important investigation because the river, the nature are important for people living close to them. So that's what I can say, Sandra. I hope I have achieved your goals.
Okay, thank you. I will try to share against my screen to show you the last point of the of the presentation for open a discussion. Oh, it was fast here. I hope you can see. I will stop my video. Well, thank you so much, Diego. It was an honor to have you today. I know sometimes they have a very main constraint because the internet limitation from the valley. I don't know if you're located there, but we would like to open the debate because it is very important that in some places, especially in Ecuador, even with a very progressive new constitution where the rights of the nature are included, they are not really specific ways of how the creating a legal right for rivers could be implemented. There is a very nice work from Dr. Donnell from Australia that I think you should, for people that is interested to see a little more. But the legal rights of the river or the legal rights of the nature, not necessary as argued, that may increase its legal power. So it is very nice that with Diego and other scholars, we are discussing that everything is not just culture in minority or in ethnicity groups, but also they have the rights of the management of their own natural resources and to keep it then in a good conditions. Also, the governance framework is very important because always, or in some places, the governance is remains very vague concept. So it is also a kind of to follow the principle for water governance. The disaster impacts is also a major concern in the country, and especially in places and the Chota that is very vulnerable for the high temperature, the low precipitation, and facing strong and extreme drought scenarios in the future. So introducing a new approach as the cultural rights approach also enhance the idea of the cultural heritage as an example for other countries in the world. So I will stop here and probably we can go to open the discussion.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you very much also, Diego, for coming and giving this very good presentations. I have never looked at, giving a right for nature is something that we really talk about today. When the world is struggling and failing to respect human rights, we talk about over here the right of water. In Ecuador, being incorporated an article in the constitutions. That's very interesting. Any questions for Sandra or Diego? Yeah, let me take this opportunity to ask one question, Sandra. This is about rivers or water bodies cannot be. It is everybody's resource. That means they cannot be appropriated. They cannot be private good. I agree with you that water is vital for humans and for others, and it has to be a common good. It cannot be appropriated. People should have free access to fresh water. We still struggle in maintaining that. But also on the other hand, water, most of the fresh water is either on land or inland, or in other words, either they are groundwater or maybe are surface water. And the land is also owned privately. So how do you really somehow see this conflict between you can appropriate a land, and then on the other hand, you can say you cannot appropriate a water which is on land, rivers, and also at the same time groundwater?
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question and a very complex one, because as I mentioned, every country has their own constitution and their own legal frameworks, and in that context, they have to closely look what is appropriate to implement or to enforce this law. In some cases, for instance, you have a clear difference between private property rights in the case that you own the land, in the case that you have also the public property rights in the case that the government owns that land, or the government owns that piece of land, or in case this kind of structure. And I'm going to say structure because I can say that one of the cases in Ecuador with the use of the water as a common pool resource, it was precisely in the case in the construction of flooding structure. Why? Because they could have the water, and when they made these kind of structures to channel the water or to make this kind of dams or another infrastructure to avoid floodings, who is on the water if this infrastructure is impacting communities that probably they are not so happy that they are going to build up this enormous structure or physical structure in close by their own community. Well, that is the case of Ethiopia and the big dams. So in that context, we are talking about scale, and also we are talking about geography and territory. So this is very complex to have just one answer. And I think it's open the debate about how community management or community natural resource management has these legal frameworks that protect them or to empower them to claim if this kind of cases happens and they are affecting directly. So I think this is a answer with many choices, I must say. Yeah.
I can see the challenge, Sandra. Thank you very much. Yes, Theodros, and then Garamo.
No, may I continue?
Yeah.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, Sandra, for the nice presentation. I find the topic I found the topic to be very interesting, honestly, and I feel like it could be an alternative of managing water resources in general. But I had some questions in mind when we were presenting, and as an Ethiopian, I was just asking myself what we can learn from this and what are the important factors that could affect the successful implementation of this approach in managing water resources in general. So, and the other question is, what is the difference between this approach, like giving rivers legal rights and having water laws in order to sustainably manage and conserve water resources that many countries have? What's the basic difference, and I couldn't see the clear difference between the two. I mean, having water laws is also giving legal rights to water resources. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question and for your your motivation to the future to bring these kind of new approaches to water management. And what is water management? In reality, this is a kind of well-known global framework that was established to properly manage the resource in a very efficient, effective way. And the idea of giving rights to the nature is I'm going to over extrapolate the vision of what it really means, but it's just to give a legal rights as a person. And the comparison is not really here what is matter. What is important is that when you have no more options to protect an object or a person, you look another way how to implement or to make possible these rights. And that is why this approach is very challenged, because it also brings the idea how I'm going to protect the river. In the case of New Zealand, they appointed 2 guards of the river. What it means that there are a person or two persons that they can go to the court in the name of the river to claim is there are a kind of contamination or kind of disturbance that it can affect the health of the river. And that is a kind of a good example. There is, I think, was another one in Colombia. And I can tell you that the first place that I visit to have the most clear idea about how drought can have a very close impact in the people was Ethiopia. I went from Addis Ababa to Devres Marcos with the bus. I crossed the whole Gord, the Blue Nile and everything. But it gives me a very good picture about how drought through erosion can affect the farmers and the quality of the land. And also how the scarcity of the water affected not because the amount, but because the quality. So a good example how we can introduce the new approach is going to a place that everything is well done, and it's in the Netherlands. The Netherlands have in the European water framework, and they have a very strong program. They call it, and it was called the Nature 2000 or Nature 2000. Now I think it's Nature 2030. And they are looking in another possibilities how to protect one very important area that is the Bodensee. It's a tidal sea. It has the status of World Heritage. And they are looking how to bring the right of the nature as a global concept in order to protect an ecological system that have very serious problem of contamination by different sources. And that is, I think, this is the main difference. Water management help us to have a better understanding in order of the technical dimension, the economical dimension. We help with the water governance social context, of course. The rights of the river is giving a different value. And that is why we are introducing this approach now by the Chota Valley, because it's a culture that is mostly well known because the dance or the narrative of what they have been done, but they have a river that they have to use as a tool and a strategy to enhance the cultural values of the place. Because if the river is contaminated, if the river disappears, it's also disappear a kind of unique group in the world, that is the Afro-Ecuadorian descendants, that they are still placed, even they are very complex environmental place with a very, it's a very hot valley and it's very dry. So the river have another value. And I guess we have the opportunity to provide another value to the nature. That is more or less my explanation.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandra. Dr. Garamo?
Okay. Thank you for the nice presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
So you said legal right of rivers. So rivers are the results of, there is no river without a basin. When you say legal rights of rivers, you mean right to the basin? One.
No, I guess, yes. Yes.
Let me finish. Finish. Then how do you see the implication of these legal rights to transboundary water management? So rivers is one thing, and basin is the basis of a river. And when you say legal right of a river, do you imply legal right to a basin or whatever is happening in a basin? And how could this be an input for a transboundary water management? That is my question.
Yes, and thank you to bring the question of the transboundary water management. Actually, one was my main topics of my investigation. And also using some of the concepts of Eleanor Armstrong with the policy trees and co-governance, also to better understand what happens in a transboundary basin. What makes interesting this new concept of the rights of nature, it is because they provide a person legal approach to, in this case, not to the water, but to the river, treating them as a legal personhood that it can be protected by the court. But coming back to the question to the transboundary basin, I am completely sharing with you the concern, because most of the areas where cross-border or transboundary river basin are, there are mostly run by treaties, and this is different. When we talk about a river, we are imagining a free flow of the water that comes from one place, cross-border to another country, that probably they are not having or implementing the same legal framework of giving rights of nature. So what is happening in one side, or what it happens in one country, as in Ecuador, where legal rights to nature are implemented and given by the Constitution, and where in some way communities or individuals can place a legal or demand a legal protection from that resource, in this case, the river, because contamination and so forth, it's not going to be implemented in the same way, because this free flow of water that is crossing from one country to another, it's go to a country that probably have completely different legal framework. Besides, that is one of the problems that I am facing in my investigation with the issue of water governance, is that most of these transboundary places, they are below the international treaty agreements. And the demands on that sense are completely different. So that is more or less what I can say about it.
Thank you, Sandra. Any other question or comment for Sandra?
I have a question.
Okay, Wasan, go ahead.
Comment. It is a very interesting presentation. As the population grows and resource limitation is happening around the world, then you have to do every structural change to benefit out of the resource. For example, the Chota Valley might need a result. It has to be done to control flooding, which is a problem. At the same time, irrigate during the drought. So as long as population is increasing, certain adaptations has to be done. And there are quite a lot of cases. For example, the Everglades in South Florida, it is legally being protected. But at the same time, the agricultural areas and the cities that share the water with the natural system, both are getting a share. And there is a case where certain accommodation is done with respect to environmental rights and settlement in agriculture. So the question is, with increasing population, you need full control of all the resources, including water.
Okay, it's more of a comment than a point of view.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
any other questions or comments? You like to respond, or you like to say a few words, Sandra, or you're okay?
Well, I was thinking that in one of my last key points, I also agree that even the rights of nature is a very good thing on us to realize that there are other ways of community management about their own resources. There are also not completely given the power of that change. So there are another another ways that we have to find as a useful strategies to make possible this transformation that is not just impacted by climate change or by another drivers, as the doctor just mentioned, that is the increasing growing population, and even because it's dealing to migration or the overuse of the resources in order to feed more people or to provide more clean water to the people to drink. So in the case of the Chota, the risk that they are facing is not just because all these drivers, but also because they have to be included in the decisions from top down that they are going to perform in these kind of future scenarios. And it's not just the Chota case, there are also communities around the world that they are not fully included in the implementation, even worse, in the design of this planning, that they are already going to provide a proper response for these future scenarios. So this is just a way, one way from many ways that we can blend to really to respond to these concerns in the future.
Okay, any other question, comment for Sandra? Sandra, I have a question. The fact that I believe Chota is also in the upper basins of the Amazonian, or is it outside the Amazon basin?
No, it is a very good question, because I forget to mention that the distribution, for instance, to the ethnic groups, not just the indigenous, that they are almost placed in the mountains, but the Afro-Ecuadorians, they are placed not just in the Esmeralda, is a very seaside province. They were the first slaves, they arrived there, but also they are located when they migrate to the big cities, but they are also located in the Amazons. And that is a kind of a different vision to think Afro-Ecuadorians located also in a place that for us is just for native people to the Amazons. And maybe this is a good opportunity to hear Diego, that he can have a very more strong opinion about the location of the Afro-Ecuadorians also in the Amazon. I don't know if Diego can provide a little more response.
The reason I ask you that question is because of the. I would like to ask you a question because in the upper Amazonian basin, including in Peru, Colombia, and I believe also in Ecuador, is the role of these big companies, these mining companies, oil explorations, and big companies. They're really compromising the quality of water, but also at the same time, also there are serious, health issues, particularly to the indigenous communities and also other parts of the communities. So I was wondering, how serious this is in that part of Ecuador, and what's being done, and how are they really involving the communities and also others in the overall water resource planning and implementations of these types of activities.
Yes, maybe we could give the voice to Diego in this sense.
Diego, yeah. Okay.
Well, it's kind of hard to say because I'm not there, but what I know is kind of difficult and harder even there, because as you know, those are strategic spaces where in Amazonas region, we have the oil. In Esmeraldas, there's these palm, African palm agricultures and things. So contamination of rivers there are even tougher than in here. And in the Amazon region, this the situation is that Black people are minorities there. Even in Esmeraldas, imagine that the 90% of the population is Black. They are not in control of their resources. It's white mestizo people in control of the resources, and there are a lot of processes of contamination. I have I have read these authors who call it environmental racism that is applied in those communities, even though they are there, even though they are a majority, there are others being in control of those resources and just going over the desires of these people here. I can imagine that in the Amazon region is even worse, as I said, because Black people is a very minority in there.
Interesting.
Yes, that is one of a very good answer, because this is real. How you can explain that in Esmeraldas, with 90% it's Black people origin, they are not in control of almost anything, and it's just a small minority that they are taking the last decisions over the resources, services. And that's why my interest that this close or small community can empower, not having more knowledge about their own rights and value of the resources that there are around them.
Interesting. Okay, any other question or comment for Sandra or Diego? Okay, thank you very much.
I have a
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question, but probably it's from ignorance. How do you assign this legal right in the transboundary waters, like rivers, if pollution is coming from the other side without any national, laws or something that you mentioned? So I was wondering, for waters that are transboundary, how are your framework works in that aspect?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that question, because it's one of my main warnings to the government. I'm still, my voice is not strong enough to bring the issue to a more high-level dialogue. Why? Because I expressed my before to the doctor or somebody from the audience that asked me the same question. The free flow of the water that goes from one country to another, that is not an excuse that one country can contaminate other. If they are already doing illegal things, or they are not putting enough effort to avoid these activities, as it happens with deforestation or mining, or even contaminate the water with heavy metals or another chemicals in order to produce cocaine. But how to avoid this when there are certain agreements, international agreements on transboundary basin level, that probably they are rolling over the national agreements. So this is in my opinion, it is a very separate issue that it has to be debated in a very different way also. And to, in some way, not to demand, but to implement some standards to avoid this kind of conflict that it can happen in the future, in the case of Ecuador versus Colombia or Ecuador versus Peru, as it happens now because underground water, as it happens with Bolivia versus Chile, or it happens in another place of the world. My idea, just through your interest question, is to be clear where we stand in the legal frameworks, and to be prepared that all these concepts that I have been mentioned today, they are well understood and they are in balance about the operationalization in the country. So what it means, as the Netherlands said, to harmonize what the concept means, to have just one language that everybody knows about the meaning and how the meaning or the concept meanings it will be implemented in the same way. Otherwise, we are going to be talking in different language, and we are going to create more conflict than agreements. and clarity in that one. I guess that could be a good approach, just to standardize in operationalization. I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think South America and Asia, Europe are really very good in terms of managing interbasin water issues. They are really proven to be very good. I mean, we have very hot spot areas in the Middle East, in Africa, including the Nile. But in most cases, they really work it together. I mean, and one is the Binacional project in Brazil, and also Paraguay, where they did a very nice job that they share the water, they share the benefit, and everything looks good. But I think the issue in terms of transboundary water management is really the willingness to actually sit down together, form a basin-wide working group for water management that actually works together. That is where we actually fail in the Nile Basin and in most areas where there is these hotspots. Unless you have the willingness to sit down and understand and appreciate and accept the rights of each country to access the fresh water, then you stop over there and everything will be an issue from that.
Well,
Any other question? Okay, thank you very much. It's now about almost 20 minutes past 10. Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you, Diego, for coming. Diego, I think you're in Ecuador, yeah? And Sandra is in the Netherlands. It worked fine, and I'm very happy to see all of you again in the upcoming Nile Talk webinar, which we will be announcing soon. Thanks a lot, and we will be posting this presentation if Sandra allows us, and also the recorded video on the website, and I will share that with all of you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
Good afternoon and good morning, yeah, and good evening for some of you.
Good evening to everybody.
Bye.